Welcome, everyone. For those of you that don't know me yet, my name is Luis Antonio Pichardo, and I'm the founder and executive director of DSTL Arts. This particular workshop series is called Héroes de Los Ángeles, and so I'd like to welcome you all to the very first session, the intro session to Héroes de Los Ángeles, where we're going to be talking about your heroes, the heroes that you hope to, bring light to. The heroes that we'll be kind of discussing and talking about, they could be anybody from, like, say, a very well-known figure in our community, such as Ruben Salazar, who was, one of the most vocal journalists of the Chicano movement, especially during the 70s. Or it could be, somebody that's a little bit closer to home for you, somebody that isn't maybe as well known. Like in my case, it might be, my grandpa, who was one of my heroes. My pop struggled a lot in life and showed me a lot in life. And so I would love to honor him. So the definition of hero is going to really fall on you. And as part of this particular project, you'll be encouraged to write a few different pieces of creative writing. It could be anything from a short story to an ode, a poem written in that person's voice, or a corrido, which, if you're familiar with the term, a corrido is a sort of traditional form of poetry and music that is based in Mexican culture. So it's very similar to an ode, but has its own structure. So those will be the basic things that we'll be covering over the next 5 weeks. And the gentlemen in the room, Abraham Jaramillo and Javier Hernandez, both of them will be taking on the role of actually illustrating portraits of your heroes. And so to give them an opportunity to talk a little bit about their background, their experience, I'd like to give them a chance to say what they hope to, bring to the table as part of this teaching artist team. First, I'd like to present to you guys Javier Hernandez, who is the lead teaching artist. Javier, feel free to say a few words, and yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Luis. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining the workshop. I think it's a really special, interesting workshop, so looking forward to seeing what everybody comes up with. So my name's Javier Hernandez. I'm a cartoonist. I make my own comic books. I've been doing that about 22 years. Here's just two of them, just to show you, I'm legit. So I write and draw everything. Some comic people, like, there's a writer, there's an artist. In my case, I'm one of the ones who likes to write and draw the comic and make up the story. So I'm just like a one person bullpen, I guess you can call it. I've also been teaching, I think, about 15 years now, like with great organizations like DSTL Arts. I'm also currently working with Artworks LA. So I do a lot of teaching where I go teach at schools. We kind of like making up the art programs since there's not too much arts left in schools, which is kind of good for people like me because I can work for these great organizations that specialize in art teaching, and then they partner up with LAUSD or libraries, whatever. So I teach comic book classes pretty much all the time to high school, mostly high school kids, but done college level and all ages type things. So I've been lucky enough to work with DSTL Arts, I think, on 2 projects that I recall. The recent 2, the Comics que Curan, which we just did 2 volumes of that, and that was a very special thing for me to do. It was a mental health oriented comic, so it was something new for me too. So this is interesting for me too because I'm not really doing a comic. I'm just going to be illustrating your stories, the stories that you guys write about, entirely of your choosing, right? Of the heroes you want to honor. So what I hope to bring to your tribute to your hero is, I'll be reading your piece, whatever you write. Louis mentioned a poem, a corrido, whatever. So it's, how should I put it? I mean, I think my drawing will be as good as your tribute is, right? So whatever you express about your hero in your tribute, whatever highlights or effect they had on you or other people, I'm going to be like the reader, right? I'm just going to read it just to take it all in. But also as the artist, I want to interpret it and portray it as best I can. So I want to try to just do it based on what you write in your entry. But I could see maybe, if it's okay, communicate with the individual writer. Maybe I have a few follow-up questions, or at least maybe I would think more photo references, maybe like, for example, you have photos of your uncle, if it's an uncle you write about. Do you have photos of where he lived, or did he work at a shop or something? Whatever details that helps me make a better image to represent your story. So, but it's all based on your story. So, like I said, Lewis will be going over a couple of great tips over the weeks of how to approach your writing, how to assemble your ideas, and then I'll come in at the end and enjoy it. And then, we'll be partners, you and me, whatever writer I partner up with. You wrote it, I'm drawing it. So, all for your hero. Thanks.
Yeah. That's right. It's all for your hero, So really take advantage of this opportunity to honor the person that you choose, and feel free to also reach out to any one of us for guidance and ways in which you can maybe augment your story or poem or corrido. And we'll definitely be here as a resource and try to actively communicate with you if we have any questions about the way you'd like them to be portrayed. Up next, I'd like to also give Abraham Jaramillo a chance. Abraham has been working with Distill Arts for a long time as a volunteer and as a teaching artist, and I'll let him speak a little bit more about what he hopes to bring to your particular projects.
Hi, everybody. We talked about this project months and months ago, right, Luis? We were really interested in knowing what people think about the people who they look up to, especially heroes that are real life. Because usually we see heroes portrayed in movies or comic books, but they are not the real deal. And we wanted to know what you guys view as heroes, because we all know like people that we personally know, or people who are more celebrity status in their community or historical. So I kind of really want to be amazed by what you guys come up with, because it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, it definitely will be cool. I think that, especially when I was speaking with one of the partners that Distill Arts has in presenting artwork to the community, specifically on bus shelters, Melissa was very excited about the prospect of potentially even having your artwork along with the artwork that Abraham and Javier create, potentially posted up in several bus shelters around LA. So, that is something that I'm going to be pursuing. It's nothing that I can necessarily promise will happen right away after the culmination of this particular series. But when we do finally have all of your writing and also the artwork created by Javier and Abraham ready to go, we will be publishing this. And so in multiple ways, you'll be having a chance to honor the person that you're nominating as hero, through your writing, through the artwork done by our working artists here, and also potentially out in the community where they will be able to see it in person, plus in a book that will be distributed around the world. Really, there's no boundaries to where your writing will end up. To give you some examples. Oh yeah, go ahead, Javier.
Oh, I just wanted to say, we just came through Dia de los Muertos, right, a week or two ago. That was the one night we can honor our loved ones, our heroes. But this is neat because this is going to be in print, so it's going to be, it's always going to be out there. It's not just a one-time thing. So that's a nice thing that it's going to be in print. Yeah,
absolutely. And the fact that we're going to have this in print is, I think, a way for us to sort of generate a legacy, I want to say, of the artwork that that you create, and also the long-lasting impact that the people who you are writing about, they had an impact on you, on your community, and this is a way for that impact to be even spread out further. So that's part of the reason why we're creating this particular series. So to give you an example of the type of book that you will potentially have your work published in, I'd like to share with you right now a couple of give me a quick second here to switch over to presentation mode. A couple of images of the types of artwork or books, excuse me, that we've done in the past. So hopefully you're able to see my screen right now. This right here is snapshots of South Central. This is an 8-inch by 10-inch, basically coffee table book. It's a photography book that features poetry and photography done by people in the workshop series that we did a few years ago, where Abraham was part of the team teaching photography to participants. So, this is the size, more or less, and the quality of the book that your work would be featured in. To give you an example of some of the work that was done with Javier in the Comics que Curan workshop series, I have some photos here as well that I can share with you. Hopefully you're able to see these. So this is an 8.5 by 11 magazine, and this particular anthology, the Comics que Curan anthology, is basically the same format, done in the glossy print in particular. And this series is actually currently on display right now on 2 bus shelters in South Central. So, this is hopefully, giving you an example of the type of investment that we're doing in the final published work that will be produced through this particular series. So, does anybody have any questions so far about the purpose of this workshop series, what our goals are, anything like that?
Quick question, Luis.
Yes.
Do you have the address for the bus shelters? So if we want to go see them?
Sure. Yeah. The bus shelters. Yeah. The bus shelters are located on South Central Avenue and East Slauson Avenue. So it's on that particular intersection right now. The bus shelter will be actually hosting the artwork for at least the next 3 months, if not longer. Also, the No Fake News artwork that was produced through that particular series is also on a bus shelter, and that is on the corner of, I believe it's Chicago Street and 3rd Street in Boyle Heights. Okay. Javier?
Yeah, I had a question, and you may end up covering it in your talk today, or one of the participants may end up asking. But I was curious. I mean, the title is Héroes de Los Ángeles.
Mm-hmm.
What's like? If I was a writer, like, what's the parameter? Like, it has to be LA based. What are you allowing for that?
Right, that's a good question. So part of the reason why I chose that particular title of Héroes de Los Ángeles is because Héroes de Los Ángeles has kind of a double meaning. Los Angeles, or Los Angeles, is the name of our city, right? And there are many heroes that live here now. But in Spanish, it can also be translated as the angels' heroes. And so, if you think of yourselves as the angels, well, even angels have heroes. And so it could be a hero that is here in the city of Los Angeles, in the county of Los Angeles. But it could also be a hero that maybe is not from this community specifically, right? The definition of community is relative, and your community and your experience as an individual is what is ultimately going to determine whether or not that person is a hero. So, any other questions? No? All right. Well, I guess the next basic question that I have for you and to maybe start our discussion is, well, what is a hero? How do you define a hero? And feel free to jump in. And for anybody that doesn't know each other, maybe also just let us know your name and maybe a hero that you might want to actually honor through this series. Abraham and Javier, also you guys can jump into.
I was gonna share just like my definition of what a hero is. Again, this is my interpretation, my definition. I think it's someone you admire a lot. But I mean, I think we admire all our friends, but I think it's someone who's doing something or has done something either with you, to you, or to the community or whatever, that you admire so much that in some ways you aspire to emulate that in some way, right? That's a pretty broad term, but I mean, like for me, I'm a comic book creator, I'm an artist. I tend to have a lot of heroes in the arts, right? Whether it's a filmmaker, a comic book artist, and these are people. Sometimes you latch onto these people like at a young age, right? Like you fall in love with their work, whether it's whatever, I don't know, Dr. Seuss or, in my case, comic book artist Jack Kirby from 1960s Marvel, and Steve Ditko, another comic book artist from the Marvel 60s. So as a kid, really got into their art, and they stood out from the other artists. And then, we're talking decades. As I get older and I see more of their work and I follow their work, and there's always something about them that they're kind of like a North Star, right? It's kind of like something you focus on as a person and me as a creator. It's like it's way up there, out there, and you just kind of always use that like to guide you in what you do. Not that you want to copy them, but you take a lot of examples from their stories. And I don't mean just their stories that they created. I mean like their life stories, right? Like working in the business of comics, maybe sometimes how they got screwed over by comics. Like those are lessons too, right? When someone gets an injustice done to them, that's a lesson to you to try to avoid that stuff when you get in that same field. So anyway, I like to look at heroes as like, a North Star, a compass that I kind of, as I do my own work, even though me and these heroes are in the same we're in the same field, comic books. I want to do the different things that they didn't do, but they always provide a great example of lessons to cautionary tales, but also things that they did right that you want to do as well. So that's just kind of my interpretation of a hero.
Excellent. A North Star. I like that. Anyone else? What is your definition of a hero?
Yeah, I don't. I guess to me, it's someone that's like selfless in terms of like community heroes. I feel like I was talking to Abraham about this the other day, or actually yesterday, about unsung heroes. Whereas like they don't see themselves as like larger than life, but they may be part of a cause, or they may be part of something that's bigger than themselves. So they've kind of given themselves to that cause. And I think in terms of like qualities of a hero, is they emulate what you want to be or what you want to see yourself. So they're almost like, you want to push to be like that person because you admire who they are. And it also like you like, I think the interesting part of a hero is like, especially when we're younger, we may see our parents as heroes, but you see that they have flaws as well. But I think even looking beyond the flaws, or even because of those flaws, there are people that you admire because they're more like you than you may think. That's my definition of a hero.
That's a good one.
I think that's an important thing Mauricio said, that they could be flawed. Yeah, we can't don't think the hero has to be perfect, because I don't know where you're going to find perfection. So that's a really important thing. In fact, flaws make it more relatable, right? Because, they messed up, I messed up too a lot, whatever. So that's a really good thing to highlight.
Yeah, definitely. Our humanity is, I think, part of what makes us able to become a hero. It is the struggle that we overcome. And maybe that's part of the story that you tell. More than likely, it will be a part of the story that you tell about your heroes. Anyone else want to jump in with a definition of a hero? Your personal definition?
Well, I have to agree with Mauricio. I mean, the definition of hero, I think, doesn't have to be exactly as good as being good. Just about the actions they create that are superhuman or beyond the regular. But to me, it's something that creates good in this world. And I already did my story for my hero, and I also thought about different ways of approaching it and who would I choose. But I really wanted to get somebody that I knew that goes beyond what regular people do and does it without thinking of themselves and does it to make this world a little better, even though sometimes it costs them something, either time, either money, either relationships, either their own personal health, but they do it because it is within them to grow beyond their limitations, as they were saying. We're humans, we have flaws, we're weak, we have so many things that we have to do, but still we choose to become better. And that's what I want about heroes.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. San Juanita, did you have something to say?
I was gonna. I guess my definition is more subjective, sentimental. I don't know if it's because of my age, but I cannot think. Not that I don't, see what people do. Yes, I do. But at my age, my definition, I guess I'm beginning to see things in a different way. But I cannot. There are a lot of great people that have done great things selflessly. Have given of their time, and they do it because they support whatever cause. But for me, when you brought it up yesterday, I was thinking, I'm not even from Los Angeles. I moved. I came from Texas. I moved here 13 years ago. So I'm thinking, I know the reason I moved here. I moved here because I wanted to write, and I saw that mostly all the writers live here in California. So I said, that's the place to live, right? But I don't feel like, I still don't feel like, how can I say it? Because even when you showed the picture of the snapshots, because I'm in the valley. I'm not even in downtown LA. I don't know a lot of the places in LA. So I was thinking, what heroes would I write about? And most of the time I write about my grandfather, and I write about my father. And to me, a hero, just like I think, I don't know, Abraham. Because I see the name, I'm like, that has nothing to do with it. I wrote down the name, I'm like, wait, that's his name. To me, a hero is somebody who has overcome obstacles, somebody who has, gone against everything in life, I guess, and is still walking. So my dad, he overcame all, a father of 8 kids, in the fields. And so to me, my dad is my hero. And of course, my grandfather, I don't know if it's a culture. I think it's a cultural thing, but, for me to look up to my dad, to look up to my grandfather. And I cannot write about anybody else if I have not written about my dad. Of course, I've written a lot about my father. And I think it's Alicia's there, behind the camera, behind the... yes. He knows that I've written so much about my father and my grandfather. Right, Felicia?
Yes,
So,
very beautifully.
For me, those are my heroes, and I will not do them justice if I don't mention them or write everything that I've done and everything that I am. So, I mean, yes, I have Travis and all these other people, but to me, it has to be somebody that made me grow. And I think thanks to my parents, thanks to my father,
Mm-hmm.
I've survived everything that has happened in my life. I went through a divorce. I raised 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
My baby was 2 years old. He's gonna be turned 20 on Friday, my baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a 29-year-old. Like, I have 4 kids that are already older. So everything that I am, that I survived because my dad gave me the tools,
Yeah.
And he doesn't have an education. He was no education. But, so I'm more sentimental.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more sentimental. I would give it more of a sentimental definition, subjective.
He definitely qualifies as a hero for sure.
I'm sorry?
It definitely qualifies as a hero.
Well, that's why I was worried yesterday when you said that. I'm like, from Los Angeles, oh my God. But then you mentioned a personal hero. I said,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I have to say.
Yeah, and I think that's it's beautiful. And your dad definitely does sound like an amazing man, and your grandfather as well. And you're right. To be a hero, to consider someone a hero, the term hero is subjective, which is why it's important that we talk about what your personal definition is of hero. And so, if at any point you feel like the things that I'm saying as the definition of a hero apply, it's because the term hero is kind of a universal one. And the fact that there's even something that's like a theory in writing about how to tell the hero's journey, the hero's tale, that exists because it's something that ultimately has always inspired us to write. And so I think that's a good moment for us to transition to actually the handouts. So I'm going to present my screen here again, and it's good to have Vero in the room as well. We're going to start off first with the handout. If in case you're on the Google Classroom and you saw the handouts, we're going to start with the one that's just like a diagram, right? The hero's journey. La aventura del héroe. All heroes in literature, and if you really think about this, even in life, they start off with something that is their call to adventure. Almost all people experience this, whether it be something that, I don't know, is like, say, in the case of a person like my dad, who is also one of my heroes. My dad grew up in a little town in the middle of nowhere in Querétaro, which is the state of the Republic of Mexico. Querétaro has this tiny little town named Santa Lucia. And in that tiny little town, there's nothing other than, just farmland. And my dad grew up there with a very, very, very humble beginning. And so his call to adventure was ultimately his desire to have more, and part of his journey was meeting a mentor that I'm aware of. And in the case of my dad, his mentor was actually one of his uncles who came here to the United States as a young man and said, hey, there's a lot of money to be made. You can go to El United, and you can basically come back to Santa Lucia and start your own farm, have a house and everything that you will need. And so for my dad, that status quo of living in poverty, it was his own personal drive, his own personal ambitions that pushed him to come, along with the help of his tío. And so every hero that we could think of, whether that be a fictional hero or our own personal hero, they're going to eventually come to that point where they cross the threshold from the status quo into the unknown. And just like everyone, the hero is going to go through trials and failures. They're not always going to be successful when they first come. In the case of my dad, when he first came to the United States, there's a story that my dad tells me where, when he arrived in Orange County in Santa Ana, and he arrived not knowing anything or anyone, definitely didn't know English, and was actually in a car accident one day. And him not knowing where he was staying, him not knowing the language, and also not knowing, any other way to basically help himself. He was taken to the hospital in this car accident and then thrown into a taxi, and afterwards, after getting treatment, and he was sort of left on his own to say, I think I know where I'm going. Luckily for my dad, after that first failure and not being able to get a job, not being able to find his way around Santa Ana, he returned home, with basically no more money than what he came, and he was able to, from that point, then start to actually make alliances with his cousins, the ones that were able to actually make a living here in San Diego County. And so, a lot of times heroes will be introduced to their allies, their friends, their compadres, the people that will help them actually learn some new skills. And, if we go back to the story of my dad, after he became closer to his cousins, he learned the different ways in which he can go and, one, avoid the migra, and two, different ways in which he can use his talents as a farmer, actually in San Diego County, working all the different fields where all the nurseries where plants are started and then sold. Now, every hero has their villain. Sometimes that villain is circumstances. Sometimes it's themselves and their own pride. Sometimes it's the embodiment of those particular attributes in another character, and in fighting them, they go through this process of death and rebirth. So the hero at some point will experience a sort of existential death. The things that held them back, like in the case of my dad, his pride. That was something that for a very long time my dad held on to, and so much so that he would never ask for help. And it came to the point where his pride ended up hurting him. And my dad had to learn to let go of that type of pride and accept that he needed help sometimes from other people. And so in that moment of his rebirth and acknowledging that he does have to actually accept help sometimes, led to his revelations. Every hero goes through this process and basically ends up leveling up. And in most stories and comics and video games and, TV shows, movies, the revelation is at that point where the hero finally is able to accept the help of others. They're finally able to defeat their villain. And a lot of times they'll go through this process of atonement. And that process can look differently for different people, for different situations, but that is the point in which they overcome their greatest challenge. And they end up getting some sort of a gift out of that. They'll receive whatever it was that they were looking for. In the case of my dad, in his younger years, that meant him actually finally becoming a homeowner. And that meant him having el carro del año, and him having a very stable job, and him actually becoming a resident alien and being able to be here in the United States to raise us as a family. And, for my dad, that meant a lot. So that created for him a new status quo. And that new status quo for my dad meant that he was a little bit more of a balanced man in the sense that, he felt like he had completed something in his life and his character arc was finally complete. Ultimately, that meant that, my dad had other challenges that he had to overcome. So his call to adventure started all over again. And knowing my dad now, he would probably say that his next call to adventure was actually having to then overcome the divorce that happened between him and my mom later, which led us through this whole cycle, the whole hero's journey again, to where now my dad is, I think, a much wiser and much more, say, a less prideful man. So if you think about your hero that you want to write about, that you want to have honored in this particular series, you'll probably reflect on their life and the things that they had to overcome, and see along their hero's journey that there was something that inspired them to want to become the person that they are now. There was probably a mentor or someone that helped guide them along the way. And for sure, there was something about the status quo that they were just not satisfied with. And that's what probably pushed them to eventually cross that threshold, to make that decision to go into the unknown and battle, basically fight for whatever it was that was important to them and that ultimately inspired you. Because in my opinion, a hero is the person that inspires us because of their failures and because of the challenges that they overcome. And, their process of death and rebirth may not be something that you necessarily are aware of, but it is something that they likely experienced because they were human too, and they are human still. And, that gift that your hero will receive, or did receive, it's something that probably, is part of the recognition of being a hero. Their life and their own hero journey is probably still going if they're still alive. And it might be what continues to inspire you to consider them as a hero. Does anybody have any questions about the hero's journey, that cycle of things, of events that I just covered? Mauricio?
That's one in the messages.
Yeah, Luis, I was just gonna. I guess it was a question, but I didn't put a question mark. But can heroes go through multiple cycles of the hero's journey?
Absolutely. There's really no. I mean, being human means that we're constantly evolving and constantly growing, right? And so it is very likely that a hero will go through multiple cycles of their journey. And to sort of answer Vero's question, so there are basically two different types of status quos, right? There is the initial status quo that our hero will start with, right? But then once they overcome whatever challenge that they were working against, they will then likely have a new way of looking at life. So their status quo changes, right? That second status quo is now how they choose to live after overcoming whatever their primary challenge was. Whoever their villain was in their life, is no longer there. And so now they have to adjust to living a life without that particular villain. So yes, we do return to another status quo. And yes, ultimately, our heroes will likely have gone through another cycle of this death and rebirth.
I think it's worth noting too, looking at the chart, they're like, the word villain, adversary, sometimes it could be yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're like the cliche, you're your own worst enemy sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Some inner demon and stuff. It doesn't have to be like an actual person or a group. It could be an addiction. Like your dad had to get over his pride.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sometimes it's something within the person themselves that they gotta conquer, and those can be very difficult to conquer. And sometimes that's why it's even a bigger thing when they can. They got rid of whatever it was, addiction or something. So
yeah, just to add to Javier's point, like I think I studied it. I think it was in a screenwriting class where they mentioned like the four main conflicts can be like man versus self, man versus society, man versus like nature or God, or man versus like another person.
Mm-hmm.
But even that could be like society as well. Whatever society is trying to push out of that hero is represented in the villain.
Mm-hmm. That's
So
right.
you're right. It can be multiple, or even all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One thing that really that I really learned, underscored, was the mental health comics I did with Distal Arts. The last two sessions. Because mental health, that's something that's in us. Society and has something to do with it. But yeah, if you can realign yourself better, you're gonna improve yourself, and you can be your own hero, I guess, in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's.
Does that mean you're your own villain as well?
Well, that's a.
Or some aspect, I guess, in that instance, it would be like the mental disorder is the villain, quote unquote, or coming to grips with that. I don't know.
It's the adversary. It's the thing you have to overcome. It's the
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Right. And so, and I'm glad that you brought up the table or the graph that I had also included in the handouts. Right. Every hero's journey does have archetypes. Right. So there are archetypes, and you can look at this even in our everyday lives. Archetypes are recurring patterns of human behavior symbolized by standard types of characters in movies and stories. I should also mention that the hero's journey theory comes from Joseph Campbell, who was a writer and scholar that really spent a lot of time looking at mythology and using mythology as kind of like the way in which we've always spoken about figures in our society that we initially would call a hero, right? Mythology translates over into comics, translates over into movies. Basically, all mediums, all different types of media have these archetypes and a way in which we talk about our heroes. So, heroes, at least the general definition, in literature, are the central figures in stories. Everyone is the hero of his or own myth. And so if you think about that, right, like the mythology of Luis, the mythology of Mauricio, the mythology of San Juanita, and the mythology of Vero, we are the hero, right? We're the central figure in our stories. But there's also a mythology to the people that we know. It's a mythology that our hero has within our own mind. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to get you to write that mythology of the hero that you're selecting. Now, shadows is the archetype, the name of the archetype that we would typically know as the villain, right? Now, the villain or the enemy can perhaps be the enemy within, as you see here. Some examples would be like the dark side of the force, the repressed possibilities of the hero, his or her potential for evil, even. That could be a shadow, right? That could be, like in the case of my dad, his pride, right? That could have been the thing that would have been his shadow, the thing that could have stopped him from being, the type of man that he is now. It can be other kinds of repression. So it could be societal repression. It could be mental health issues like repressed grief, anger, frustration, or even a repressed creativity that is dangerous if it doesn't have an outlet. So, keep that in mind, right? There are things that our heroes have fought. It might be a personal battle that they're fighting, and that might be what has inspired us. But if your hero is also somebody that is, like, say, out there, trying to inspire people to vote, if they're a suffragist, and they were fighting for women's rights, for voting rights and for other types of rights, they're fighting society and, the repression that society placed on them. So there's a lot of different ways in which we can view the shadows in the life of our heroes.
So,
Question? Is there a question?
my mic was on. Yeah, Russ, in the chat. Can a shadow also be like aspects of the shadow? Can it also help to mentor the hero as well?
I guess so. I mean, if you're talking about like, say, an individual that is, I don't know, like maybe inspiring themselves.
I'm thinking of an anime where the main character, I guess, through his first arc, he has a demon inside him essentially, and his arc is that villain. But in another arc, that villain ends up becoming like a mentor to him because he learns to come to grips with the demon and understand and even feel sympathy for it. So they actually become like buddies.
Mm-hmm.
But that journey, I guess, encapsulating it went from like this negative aspects of his, it is Naruto actually. This aspect of him, that he once rejected is now what helps him save the world essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say, I mean, also kind of listen to the way that you phrased that, right? In one cycle of that hero's journey, that hero was overcoming that particular shadow in themselves. Then in the second cycle, after they have defeated that particular shadow, that particular villain, that villain can now become an ally and potentially the mentor, right? I think that it's important that we kind of understand that there's a difference between an ally and a difference between a mentor, right? The mentor is typically the guide that is, providing some level of wisdom and guidance in that hero's, like the beginning of their path, right? It can be like Yoda in the case of Star Wars. Yoda is guiding Luke Skywalker in the development of his understanding of the Force. But an ally is a person that understands the flaws of that particular hero and then is there to help them along the way as they progress through the journey, like how Obi-Wan Kenobi was in the very first Star Wars movie, The Last Hope, right? He was a mentor, but he was also an ally that was there providing, backup, at least in the beginning. Han Solo ended up becoming more that ally towards the very end, not the mentor, Javier?
Yeah, I was going to say it's an interesting question Mauricio brought up. I mean, what I'm curious about in the model you guys are talking about, just as a sake of conversation, but like you said, the hero learns from the shadow, but is that assuming that the shadow himself, the villain himself, had his own arc and is now like, a better person, whatever? Or literally saying like the person can learn from the shadow?
It's interesting. I was going more for the former, as in like, it's all like, I guess the shadow's going through its own arc. So it's kind of, as you said, Luis, it has its own mythology. The shadow is its own protagonist in its own story.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they coincide together, whereas like each sees each other as an adversary or a villain.
Right. So
their arcs kind of meet at a point where they kind of come to grips with each other and become allies.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I think when a truly villainous character does have an arc and then becomes a hero, that's actually very hopeful, right? Because none of us are really terrible villains, but if like a horrible villain can change its ways, then hey, I got a better chance. I just got to take a couple of things.
And a lot of really well-written villains are just heroes that lost their way, or at one point, just made one bad decision, or one decision that they didn't think was bad, but just led them down a path.
I think a classic example is go to comics is Magneto and Professor Xavier in X-Men.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they're both actually on the same path for protecting their people. One is just being a little more like, well, I'll step on the humans next. So so very interesting ways you can go off of that.
Yeah, totally. And I think that it's also worth mentioning that, a hero can be another person's villain also, because if you were to use that example of Magneto and Professor X, right? Magneto is a villain to the mutants that want to kind of just blend in with society. But in many ways, Magneto's approach to having the mutants blend in with society is by venerating their role as mutants, as that next evolutionary step. So what Magneto is doing is he's trying to empower the mutant kind, right? You could look at that in real life terms, in the sense of the difference between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. One in his youth was much more of a radical, and was upset and was basically, coined the phrase "by any means necessary," whereas the other one, was considered more the peace-loving one, the let's all come together and build allies, and in the trajectory of their lives. Yeah, and in the trajectory of their lives, if neither one had been assassinated, they probably would have ended up both sort of going in opposite directions of the way they started. There were signs that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was actually starting to become more radicalized, because he was starting to feel the frustrations of the limits of peaceful protest. And Malcolm X, after his holy journey, he came to realize that there is a lot of hope in actually creating unity amongst people and seeing people for just people, as opposed to the very black and white way of viewing the world that he originally started with. So yes, I guess you can say that the shadow can become a hero, because ultimately, everybody is the hero of their own story, and that is part of that process of death and rebirth. Everyone develops over time, some faster than others, but that is what makes them ultimately the hero of their story. And it's that process of them going through those changes that I think inspires us as the outside viewer looking in, to see that person as a hero. So yeah. I guess just for the sake of reviewing the rest of that handout, you can always look at these handouts later and reference them as you're working on your particular stories for this particular project. But there are other archetypes. They may or may not come out in your story as you write it. Like I said, there's the mentor, there's the herald, the one that brings news of an impending change. They are the ones that bring the call to adventure to that particular hero. There is the threshold guardian, so there's a force that stands in the way of our hero, maybe pushing forward into the unknown. It could be a jealous enemy. It could be, an overbearing mother that is afraid for their son to leave the house and go to something into the unknown, basically. There's shapeshifters. So there are sometimes characters that will appear in the story that try to get the hero to go off their path. And sometimes it could be like a trickster, that is there to sort of aid in a way while also frustrating in another way. And then, of course, there's the allies. And the allies are like the number one, el compadre, that is always there for the hero of the story, and is pushing and rooting for them. Because ultimately, nobody gets to where they are by themselves. We all get help along the way. Also, for the sake of storytelling, it's important to note that women oftentimes go through a different type of hero's journey. And this is adapted from Maureen Murdoch, who agrees in some ways with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the take on the hero's journey. But in literature and other art forms, you'll see that the heroine a lot of times has a slightly different path that begins with their separation from the feminine. So they're made to be more masculine at the beginning of a movie or of a story. The best example that I can think of is the story of Mulan. The original Mulan, the animated version. You see that Mulan is a young woman, and because of the impending war, she decides to basically not act like a woman anymore, and so she goes through that process of separating herself from the feminine and then identifying with the masculine and gathering allies. So that's when she starts to train for battle, and then she sort of goes through the same process of the hero's journey of the road of trials, which is the equivalent to the trials and the failures. Finding the boon of success would be, the new skills that are acquired. Awakening to feelings of spiritual aridity, which is equivalent to the death that most people would recognize in the hero's journey. And this is where it becomes interesting in the heroine's journey. There's the initiation and the descent to the goddess. So here there is sort of in tales about women, about heroines, they begin to sort of accept that they can be equivalent to a goddess and still be powerful in their own way. And there's this sort of inner conflict that helps them reconnect with their feminine energy. And then that's when they go into the healing of the mother-daughter split. So it's kind of like a recognition of their elders, of their female elders, and then taking in all of the things that they learned from their female mentors, and also reconciling their masculinity and integrating it all together to become the strongest individual that they can become. Which is at the very end, the integration of masculine and feminine. So it's a lot more about balance, achieving a balance, and no longer be feeling like they're not part of society or an equal in society because of them being feminine, and then that other extreme of totally being accepted by society because of their masculinity. It's now sort of that balance at the very end that most female heroes will see in their journey. So hopefully that kind of makes some sense. Those are things that you can explore as you write a short story about your particular hero and kind of chronicle what made them a hero. I see a question in the chat. The hero is not necessarily good by our definitions. Instead, a hero is a hero by the definition of the narrator. Yeah. Abraham gives a good example there in the chat of Scarface, right? Scarface is technically an anti-hero. There's a lot of examples of anti-heroes in storytelling. The anti-hero might be a person that society doesn't deem to be a hero, but our narrator, the person telling the story, is going to show us through that particular anti-hero's journey that they are in fact a hero, and they will go through a change. Scarface is probably an example of the other extreme, where at the very end it's because of his pride that his status quo gets changed to where he dies, right? If we're talking about the Al Pacino version of Scarface. The Punisher, as Mauricio put, is a different form of an anti-hero. The Punisher, if you're not familiar with the comic book, the Punisher is I believe a former like military guy. I don't remember if he's in the army or what, but I do remember, he's like special ops and that type of thing, special forces. And his family gets murdered by the mob. And so his yearning for revenge in a lot of in societal standards is basically a bad thing, right? Him actually going and killing the mob and taking revenge is something that society deems as bad, and so he's an anti-hero because he's going against society for his own selfish reasons. But what makes him a hero is the fact that along the way he picks up allies, he learns new skills, and he does eventually in the end sort of reconcile his yearning for justice with doing the right thing and helping other people, and sort of trying to be a source of inspiration for society. Yeah, his story is probably more of a man versus society story. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret it, and obviously all these different approaches to telling the hero's journey are just tools in your tool belt that you can use to talk about your hero, the person that you want to select to write about. Does anybody have any questions so far? No. So the reason you ask is because you met a lot of anti-heroes in your life. Yeah, we're always going to find people that society might not deem to be an appropriate hero for us, right? But there was something that maybe did inspire you about their life, I don't know, this might be kind of a corny example, but maybe it was a person that was out there dealing drugs because not because they wanted to hurt society, but because they were trying to feed their baby. The story of Christopher Wallace, the notorious B.I.G. His story is kind of like that. He became a drug dealer and a very feared drug dealer in society. But he did it because he wanted to feed his daughter. He wanted to give his daughter the best that he could. And eventually that meant that he ended up in prison for a little while and, reformed himself and, became a hero to a lot of people because as a reformed man, he used his talents, his strength as a creative person to overcome all the obstacles in his life. So for some people, the B.I.G. is a hero. For some people, Tupac is a hero, right? The rapper Tupac overcame a lot in his life. Crackhead mother, that inspired him as a child because of her activism. And he turned around and became an activist in his own way, representing his culture and his society in a way that empowered people. So, there's definitely the anti-hero out there that inspires. So, all right. So if there are no other questions or comments, I'd like to show you guys what your first assignment for this series will be. So in about 15 minutes or so after this workshop ends, you'll actually be getting a notification from Google Classroom to let you know that this particular questionnaire has been assigned to you. Hopefully you can see the screen here. I developed a short questionnaire that will hopefully get you started with finding some of the material that you'll need to tell your hero's story. It's a very quick questionnaire, as you can see here. All of the little red asterisks here do indicate that the question is required, so you won't be able to complete this questionnaire without filling out every part of it. You have until next week to do this according to Google Classroom, but if in case you're not able to get it done by next Wednesday, that's okay. Just keep in mind that we will be using this particular questionnaire to at least start the conversation with you about the portraits that Abraham or Javier will be doing for your hero. So you'll add your email address, you'll put your name so we know who to correspond with. obviously we need to know your hero's name. And then we'll ask, there's a couple of questions here that are asked of you. So, why do you consider them to be a hero? What is it that they did that, inspired you? What challenges did your hero overcome? Because every hero has a challenge that they overcome. And it might be good to also know, what impact did your hero have on your community? And keep in mind, the definition of community here is not just Los Angeles, right? It's not just LA. It could be, what you consider to be part of your community, your family. It could be you, you could be the community. It could also be, obviously, the community of Los Angeles. It could be any community in, say, Texas or Santa Lucia, right? It could be your definition of community and what they did to make a difference for that community. Also, we would like to know what inspired your hero to be the kind of person that they are or were. Sometimes it's that call to adventure that helps define that person as a hero. If it wasn't for poverty, for example, and overcoming poverty, my pop, my dad, both of them, they would probably not have made that journey of crossing the deserts and crossing the border to be here and to, start families for bettering themselves. Of course, the last one is a physical description. So, as much as you can provide physical characteristics that you feel, your hero has, those will help, obviously, in the creating of the illustrations. And as Javier mentioned, if you have photos of them, if it's a person that's in your family, or even if it's a person that's actually in the community, like an organizer or somebody that you want to honor, and you have photographs, you can share them with us, and we'll try to use those as reference for the illustration. So hopefully that makes sense. It's not a very long questionnaire, but there are some questions on it that might require a little bit of thinking. When you complete the questionnaire, you'll also get a copy of your answers too, emailed to you, so you can always reference it later and use that maybe as fuel for your short story that you eventually write. And if you're ready to get started now with the writing of it, your short story can be pretty much any length, but I do ask that you try to keep it at least, no longer than 5 pages. 5 pages is a lot of pages, believe it or not, when you're writing a short story. And, if it's going to be enough space to tell the story of that person's life, that'll hopefully work. Of course, it does not have to be a story that you submit at the very end. It could be a combination of their short story, of their mini biography. It could be, the poem that you write for them. It could be the ode or the corrido, or it could be all. Does it have to be factual? Well, there's a little bit of hyperbole, I'm sure, that might go in there. There might be a little bit of exaggeration, but let's really honor them, for that mini bio. Let's really talk about, what it is that they overcame in a realistic way, right? Yes, Vera?
I have a question. What if my hero that I'm considering, I never met, and so I only know stories that have been passed down to me, and different people tell me different things, and I choose to take in the ones that I want, the ones that I want. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to depict him good. Like, I like Malcolm X. I like the version of my grandfather that did some crazy things, and that's the part that I think makes him a hero for me, and the risks he was willing to take. But what if I don't know concretely, or what if I'm piecing together things?
Think of it like this. all movies that come out about historical figures, they're based on the story, right? But they're not entirely factual, right? We don't know the actual conversations that were had in anybody's story. So there is some creative liberty here. You can be creative in the way that you tell the story about your hero, but in as much of a way as you can. Try to stay true to the story of. So I hope that kind of answers your question. You'll have a chance to workshop your story with us. So that'll be something that'll not next week. It won't be due next week, but I will be creating on Google Classroom a couple of assignments where you'll be able to upload your work and get feedback from us on your poems, your short stories, etc. So yeah, and you'll have a chance to edit them before the final day that it's due. Javier?
Yeah, I think Veronica brought up a really interesting, that concept, kind of like, like oral histories, right? Like if it's something that's really from a long time ago, yeah, you don't know what the heck, which president was supposed to have cut down the apple tree?
George Washington.
Yeah, did he or did he not? But I think we all it's kind of a fun story now at this point, like that little part about him. So I could see Louise, be true to the idea, but if Veronica's saying like she's heard stories of a particular person from everybody, I guess, in her family. So yeah, it's kind of interesting her interpretation of how she wanted to find that person. As long as it does have to somewhat resemble like the general consensus of the person that most people know about. But like oral tradition, I do like how stories get embellished. If that's not a harsh word, or it grows and goes anyway. Because as an artist, I mean, just as a visual artist, yeah, it's fun to draw. I draw comic books, so I do like drawing exaggerated characters and demons and stuff. But so yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, like I said, workshopping this and see what ends up in the end, if that's the route she really goes.
Yeah, and if it feels appropriate for your story, for your first short story, you could even start it with the line, I will tell you this story as it was told to me. And that's all you have to say, because that's ultimately why you're writing it. It's because they inspired you. In some ways, this is not just about your hero, but it's about you and why they inspired you to call them a hero. So hope that helps. I hope that gives y'all a little bit of guidance. Remember to fill out that form, that questionnaire, as soon as you can, because that is going to be an important tool for Javier and Abraham and myself to be able to get started on creating the portraits of your heroes. You have, according to Google Classroom, the deadline is next Wednesday, so a week from today. But if you're not able to get to it before then, or anything like that, just try, letting us know, keep us in the loop, let us know that you do still plan on submitting it. And for anybody that joins after this upcoming week and next week, because this workshop series is still open, people can still do the form as soon as they join, basically. And this particular series, all of the videos of the workshops will go up on YouTube for people to get caught up and reference them in the future. So if you do have any questions or anything like that, feel free to use our Google Classroom as a way to communicate with everyone. You can post in the stream, and we'll try to stay on top of all of that and provide comments. Any last questions, comments?
So it's good that it's open enrollment as far as people can still join up, because I know me, Abraham, and Luis were still going to promote. But yeah, our wonderful participants, you guys, now that you've been in the class, feel free to share it on your social networks. And, hey, guys, come on in and sign up, because the this lecture is already will be up on YouTube, so people can catch up. That's the great thing about video. You know, people can catch up on what they missed. So
Mhm.
if you guys want to get us your friends or just put the word out, we'd appreciate it.
For sure. All right. So, yeah, I believe that's it. Unless if there's any other last questions. No? All right. I see thumbs up. So, with that, I wish you all a great. Oh, yes, Vero?
So this form, you guys are gonna email it to us?
Yeah, it's gonna go
Or is it
live.
gonna go to us?
It's gonna go live on Google Classroom in about 3 minutes. So at 6 p.m. exactly, Pacific Standard Time.
Can I put the flyer on my Facebook?
Absolutely.
Because this is just last night I heard about this class.
Mhm.
I don't know where it came from. So
Yeah, I was trying to begin promoting it as soon as it was planned, you know, and you know, announcing it last week. It was, I guess, a relatively short promo period, but you know, we're definitely going to continue promoting it. And everything. Yeah.
I want my nephew to join, but let's see what happens.
Right.
I'm trying to get him to the conchas. You know,
Yeah.
he likes from Texas. He likes to write, and
Awesome.
he got all happy when I told him about conchas.
Mhm.
I bet you hit this one.
Excellent.
Yeah. All
Cool.
right.
I think one thing that will might help, and you know, not just me, Luis, and Abraham, but you folks who want to tell your friends or whatever. Yeah, they don't have to be from, because that's kind of question I had about, like, it doesn't have to be an LA resident or an LA hero, right? So maybe that might attract more people.
Mhm.
Since
Yeah.
it's video, anyone from across the country or the world can join. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
that might be
Yeah.
helpful.
Also, we don't need to have experts here. We have a lot of levels here in this class, so anybody can join.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know, more than anything, just know that you know the three of us, Abraham, Javier, and I, you know, we are here to support you in honoring your heroes. So you know, there's really no right or wrong way to do anything that we're asking you to do. You know, we're just simply here to help tell your story, and to maybe provide a little guidance along the way. So think of us as your allies in your own hero's journey.
Oh.
All right. So yeah. Yeah. So with that said, if we have more than one, should we combine them? Actually, if you want to nominate or write about more than one hero, I do not have a problem with that. I think the only thing that I would suggest is that, you know, keep in mind that if you're going to be submitting something for both of them, that might be twice the work. And this is a 5-week series. Your final writing will be due the week before Christmas. I believe that's December 23rd. So, you know, just kind of keep in mind you may need to manage your time a little bit, but if you really do feel compelled to write about more than one hero, you're more than welcome to do so.
I'll say finish one and then let's see what happens.
Yeah. If it's like the spirit within you that you want to write about, yeah, sure. You know, if you feel like you could combine it in a way that makes sense, I definitely encourage that. So, yeah. I hope that
the
answers.
nice thing is, me and Abraham won't have to fight over the writer, because the writer will do 2 stories, so we can each illustrate that writer's
Exactly.
one of their stories.
Exactly. Yeah, multiple opportunities to illustrate for one person. Yeah. Cool. All right then, y'all. So if that's all the questions you have for now, then I wish you all a good night. Again, if you have any other pending questions or anything like that, feel free to use Google Classroom. Our stream is there as a resource for you. Yeah, so take care, y'all. Have a good one. Stay safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.